Good afternoon. You're watching AB Live, a brand new news-based chat show in which we will be discussing topics ranging from news, politics, business, technology, and so much more. On today's episode of AB Live, we will be discussing the much discussed cryptocurrency, and with me in the studio we have Ola Doudin, who is the CEO and co-founder of Bit Oasis. Thank you so much for joining us, Ola.
Thank you. I'm glad to be on AB Live.
Oh, it's our pleasure, absolutely. So today we're discussing a rather complex topic that has been talked about for the last few years. So before we get to what Bit Oasis is, I'd love to know your definition of cryptocurrency.
Sure. I think cryptocurrency technology, or the innovation behind it, which is blockchain, has different definitions given by different people. And it's one of those technologies and innovation that transcends horizontally and disrupts industries across the board. For me, the definition of cryptocurrencies is a new technology that allows value transfer peer-to-peer globally in a decentralized and open fashion. So think of that as a new definition, a new way of sending money, a new way of transferring ownership of assets. So the whole innovation behind cryptocurrencies is really the blockchain decentralized ledger keeping technology.
Right.
It's the technology that provides trust between two parties that are actually unknown to each other. And in that way, blockchain technology disrupts the middleman, because it's the trust machine that provides trust between two peer-to-peer or two parties that are transacting that don't know each other. And it's a permanent record of transactions that is decentralized across thousands of nodes across the world. And in that way, it replaces the brokers, the middlemen, in the future, redefining the roles of banks, accounting firms, law firms, etc. You name it. So
interesting.
It's a disruptive technology.
You've actually explained it pretty concisely for us to understand, of course. So I hear peer-to-peer, I hear decentralization, I hear middleman and the role of middleman, and of course eradication of the older financial institutions, probably in the long run. But tell us what your role is as Bit Oasis. What do you do?
As a Bit Oasis, we are a crypto asset exchange, wallet, and custody provider for retail clients, and now we have a focus on institutional clients in 2019. As a crypto asset platform, we allow people to buy, sell, trade, and store crypto assets. We've got 10 crypto assets right now on our platform.
I'm sorry, when you say buy, sell, trade, are you using dirhams or dollars,
Yes,
or are you using
AED.
coins?
AED. Well, both crypto asset pairs, and we've got AED-based pairs on our platform.
All right,
as well.
okay, great.
Yeah.
So one thing that I've always been interested to know is we've heard about Bitcoin, to give you an example. It started with probably $76, went up to $8,000, it's come down to $2,000 right now, or it went up to $20,000 in between. So on what basis are these values set or values given to all of these different coins, including Ethereum, Bitcoin, Litecoin, etc.?
A lot of it is driven by demand and supply, and some of those tokens have a limited supply feature, like Bitcoin, Ethereum. So that sort of helps the token have a deflationary feature in terms of price appreciation. I think in the recent years, though, we've seen a lot of exchanges with a lot of volume and market, pumps and dumps that helped in some way appreciate the value to a much higher price than what's expected in the market.
Right.
I think we're in a very new market, highly experimental at this stage. You see a lot of bubbles happening because it's a market that still has new regulatory frameworks. I think in some parts of the world, the regulation is more mature than others. So you see certain players or exchanges engaging in, listing a lot of tokens that don't necessarily have a lot of underlying value or substantial innovation.
Right.
That might lead to some increase in price because of either market pumps and dumps or price bubbles. And then
Right.
it's also a space that is quite new. We've seen that in the ICO market as well, where you've had some legit ICOs and then some other, unfortunately, scammers in the
But
space.
we might have to just introduce ICO to our viewers.
Exactly.
But before we get to ICOs, you mentioned inflation and deflation and the trends in the market that we see because of the current financial institutions that are there. But with the introduction and the advent of cryptocurrencies, those are things that we won't be seeing, at least, right? Inflation and deflation. Although we will see probably market demand and supply, we might see bears and bulls, but not really inflation and deflation. So how exactly is that going to affect the global economy?
I think that's a very interesting question. And several people in the ecosystem have their own speculation in terms of what's the future of cryptocurrencies and how it's going to challenge the status quo and all of that. I think the market is still in the size of the market right now and how it is, it's still not at a significant point where it challenges the status quo or the central banks of the world or any of that. My personal view of cryptocurrencies as a technology, I don't think cryptocurrencies are out there to challenge local or like the sovereign actual local currencies of jurisdictions out there.
Really? That's very interesting. That's not what I thought at all. Because I thought the whole point was decentralization, like you mentioned, and sort of democratization, right? When there's not one authority or one entity in every government and every economy controlling it.
Yeah, I think it's more of the way I see it as a technology, because that's the real value of cryptocurrencies, is that it allow a freer access to financial services. It allows innovation in financial services. So it allows a much more faster, easier way of transferring value globally. The way I see it, it's a disruption to traditional financial services, more so than replacing the USD or yen or all the other currencies that we've got globally out there. I think that becomes a very different conversation, and it becomes a zero-sum game at that point. And I don't think the future of cryptocurrencies is heading that way. I think with the regulation coming into place, regulating the crypto asset players of the world, allowing this technology to transcend in a more mainstream way, is allowing that innovation to happen in financial services, and then meeting the demand of customers in a much more innovative way, allowing much more innovative payment systems, more accessible financing models through ICOs.
Right.
So that's sort of the direction that I see this market heading.
Right. So the idea I get from you, from whatever you've said, is that you are pro-regulation. You want this entire cryptocurrency market to be regulated. Am I right?
Of course. Yeah, this market cannot grow and hit mainstream adoption without having the right collaboration with regulators.
Interesting. So in this market, when we're talking about the UAE and the region in general, just yesterday, in fact, we saw an MOU being signed between Saudi Arabia and the UAE to have a joint cryptocurrency, essentially. So what is this going to mean for the people? Are people going to be scared that maybe this aspect of it is also going to be monitored and regulated? Or is this just going to be a positive that the government is actually being involved, which is going to be a positive push towards this whole cryptocurrency economy?
I think there are different implementations of blockchains or cryptocurrencies happening right now in this space. So you've got the global decentralized protocols such as Bitcoin, such as Ethereum, and there are like several others right now competing blockchains that we see globally that provide global access to this protocol for value transfer and so forth. And then we see the more private blockchain implementations that you see a lot of banks, central banks and governments using and utilizing for specific products within the regulated or the existing traditional regulated sphere. And I think there are viable opportunities and there is demand for both implementations of blockchains. In my view, the first way for regulated entities, governments and banks, etc., to start understanding cryptocurrencies and blockchain implementation is by actually building those private, silo-based type of blockchain applications, because that's eventually how they get comfortable with the technology. and then gradually start experimenting with public blockchains as you see more regulation coming into the exchanges and the wallets of the world, such as Bit Oasis, obviously getting regulated and allowing that mainstream adoption of global, decentralized blockchains through the tokens that they serve.
Right. So right now we've spoken about the different elements or the different categories of people that will be involved in this whole economy, essentially. But I would like to bring in the role of miners, investors in this entire chain. What is the role that they play? So in terms of investors, we'll just get to that in a bit when we're talking about ICOs. But for miners, firstly, who exactly are these miners?
Oh, yeah. So within the open, decentralized world of blockchain protocols, you've got different stakeholders. So you've got the users, you've got the companies, the exchange players. So those are the ones that pump liquidity. Those are the ones that circulate, obviously this liquidity. And then you've got the developers, so the community that is supporting the development of those open protocols with open source code. And then obviously you've got the miners that are running the code to support the protocol and then given an incentive as a result of powering the network. So you can kind of think of it as nodes that are run on the platform. Some of them are mining nodes and some of them are just nodes that process transactions. That's with the case predominantly in Bitcoin, so we'll take that as an example. And then the miners are historically individuals that were able to run the software to process transactions and provide more power to the network, processing power, and hence they were given rewards for participating in the network and processing those transactions.
And what sort of rewards are these?
So Bitcoins, the new minted Bitcoins, they'll get like a portion of that as a reward of processing those transactions. So right now, mining participants or the miners are no longer individuals, they are mostly companies. So you've seen like the large mining companies across the world. You've got Bitfury, you've got Bitmain. So there are like several. A lot of it is more obviously in China, other parts of Eastern Europe. But they're distributed across the world.
But it's sort of a race, isn't it?
A race in some sense to be able to have the biggest processing power. I mean, in some sense, yes. The mining companies have their own obviously business model in terms of how they are able to cater for that processing power and then the incentives that they provide or the economics of running their business. I mean, recently we've seen a lot of mining companies unfortunately shut down or do a lot of layoffs because of the price of Bitcoin going down. So that contributes to the economics of their business model eventually, because they get their rewards in tokens. So if the prices of tokens go down, obviously that affects their revenues and their business models. But yeah, it's some sort of like a lottery type of thing. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Like so now I'm just going to bring the conversation back to the UAE and the region again. Again, we know that Dubai aims to be, and there's a vision of being a completely blockchain-run economy very soon, probably next year. With that vision in mind, with so much push towards technology, do you think we have at this stage enough developers, enough investors to actually keep this economy running?
Well, I think there is definitely a need to have more technological power, more developers, more technical talent in the market to support such push, obviously from the government on some of the private blockchain implementations that they're doing, but also seeing some of the new crypto players that might potentially either come into the market, ones that are scaling and growing like ours, like Bit Oasis, and then obviously the ecosystem is growing, so you'll always have new startups coming in with new products and all of that.
Yeah.
So I think there's definitely a need, and there is a shortage in that technical, talent or power. On our part, our technology teams in Czech Republic, we're building a technology team right here in Dubai at this stage, focused on blockchain. And a lot of the talent that we're attracting is from other parts of the world coming into Dubai. So I think the government can do actually more work over there in terms of attracting this talent, be able to support blockchain and cryptocurrency companies into attracting that developer talent into the UAE, because pretty much everyone that we're hiring right now is joining us from other corporations, other parts of the world, in Europe and India. So we've seen also some talent that is interested to come in from China. So I think there's definitely a good push that could be done over there.
Right.
And then in terms of investor awareness, yes, I mean, since 2015, we've raised 2 rounds of financing and have been actively talking to investors. Some of it VC, some of them other like funds or traditional funds across the UAE. And there's definitely a need to bring in more capital to fund and to support the innovation that's happening in this market. I think there's a huge opportunity for us to have here in Dubai and across the UAE a crypto ecosystem. So some of it in the vision that Dubai government has for 2020. We've seen new regulation coming out in Abu Dhabi global markets.
Yeah.
There's definitely willingness to see this happen. I think there needs to be a stronger collaboration across investors as well to be able, or private investors to be able to fund such innovation and then attract more talent into the space.
Yeah, I think I would
here
completely
locally.
agree with that. Probably there is also a requirement for training and awareness, just spreading awareness among the people who have a fear of the unknown at this point.
Yeah.
People don't really understand cryptocurrency completely, which is why we are having this discussion here today. But I think right now would be a time to introduce ICOs, which is initial coin offering. So the way I see it, it's basically just crowdfunding. You could probably explain it better.
So there are different forms of, obviously, initial coin offerings that you see happening in the market. I mean, in my view, right now, the ICO market almost dead, and it's dead for a good reason. It's not the innovation is dead. I think the idea and the innovation of ICOs brings value for companies and projects that want to seek non-traditional financing models. So, VC funding in the region takes anything from 6 to 8 months, sometimes up to a year, for companies to be able to raise funding for their private, projects or for their companies. In the ICO model, you've seen companies being able to raise within days, and then some of them within weeks, and some of them even less than days. Those are like the really hot ICOs out there.
Right.
So there's definitely, it's creating a new channel, a new avenue for companies and for protocols and some of those new technologies to be able to attract financing through non-traditional means. Now, that's sort of the financing model of ICOs, or initial coin offerings. We've seen a lot of interesting ICOs creating decentralized protocols of interesting value or of interesting offerings, so more like decentralized applications where they're rolling out tokens for utility applications to enable people to use those tokens, for payments, some other where implementation or Ethereum-like implementations for smart contracts. So there are like multiple ICO models out there, or protocols that have been launched in the last year, and I wouldn't kind of name one in specific because some of them have done very well and some of them haven't actually done. They've had good intentions but haven't executed well on
So
it.
that sort of brings me to the crash that people keep talking about. Maybe it's a little too harsh of a term to use, but last year we did see a considerable amount of drop or dip in the whole cryptocurrency market. I think Bitcoin went down by 84%.
Close to,
just last year.
88%.
88%.
Close to 80%. I think Ethereum got like a 90% hit. A lot of tokens, got like a significant hit.
So, firstly, why was that? Secondly, do you think there could be a recovery this year?
Sure. I mean, it's an interesting market, generally, crypto assets and cryptocurrencies. I think for anyone who's been kind of looking at the market for the last year, I would say, probably think that that's the craziest thing ever. I've been in the market since 2014. There has been a correction by end of 2014, beginning of 2015, where we gone from $1,000. So Bitcoin went from like $200,000. That was when the Chinese people started trading more actively on exchanges. So that was towards end of 2014. And then you had the hit from 1,000 to 600, and then around 250 for almost like 2 years, until we got more traction by mid 2017, and then obviously where you've had the spike up to 20K USD. So I kind of lived through previous bubbles and bear markets while we were actually building Bit Oasis. That's the end of 2014, beginning 2015, when we actually started building our platform. So we built our exchange in a bear market, and we were able to survive a bear market. Obviously flourished when the price of Bitcoin went, all of cryptocurrencies, frankly, end of 2017. And I think right now we're actually entering a bear market. And it sounds and looks like a very similar cycle to what happened in 2014, what happened in 2011 as well. There was a crash over there. So the market goes into periodic and
so
cycles.
Do you think it's a whole demand and supply that is actually causing the crash and the upscale again?
There's several, I think, factors causing some of those price bubbles. So some people say, oh, it's a bubble. Oh no, it's higher adoption of cryptocurrencies. I mean, let's call it. It's a bubble.
Yeah.
Those are price bubbles, and any financial market goes into price bubbles as well.
Right.
The stock market goes into that, the gold market, etc. Now, what's different in cryptocurrencies versus other markets is that there isn't yet a lot of regulation that covers most of jurisdictions that have exchanges. So we
Right.
see a lot of exchanges with very high volume that are literally just listing all altcoins under the sun and just running like a casino business basically
Yeah.
with those altcoins and a lot of like pumps and dump schemes and all of that.
But
So what
even
happens, just
Sorry.
kind of cover that
Yeah.
point. So what happens is that bubbles exist in any financial market. They're a little bit more drastic in the crypto space because of the lack of regulations and then a huge investment base that is not educated or not as educated as other financial markets. So that
Right.
causes the bubbles to become much bigger.
Okay, understood. So now you're talking about a bubble, very hypothetical situation. I was having a conversation with a friend earlier, and so we always talk about this 1% of the population that owns half the world's wealth. So now if this 1% started taking interest in the whole cryptocurrency market and decided they are going to invest either through bitcoins or any sort of other cryptocurrencies that are available, or using fiat currency, dollars, euros, name it. So if they start investing in all of this, do you think this could become the dominant economy over the fiat currency economy?
So I think crypto market in general has a potential to become one of the bigger financial markets of the world. So if you compare right now, obviously with the crash to the FX markets, to the stock markets, it still has a small value comparable to those markets, even the gold market. However, in the crypto market right now, especially in 2019, so you asked me, do you think there's a correction in 2019? I think potentially there could be, because what we're seeing is a lot of maturity in regulatory frameworks across different jurisdictions, mainly also in the UAE. We see some of that is happening in Bahrain as well, but also in the US and in the larger jurisdictions as well in terms of financial jurisdictions. So we see a lot more maturity happening across regulations, which gives a lot more assurance for institutions, for funds, family offices, so what we call institutional clients, right? To start deploying capital into this market, which potentially would increase, obviously, the size of this market. However, I think the biggest impediment to having such capital getting into the market, at least in the last few years, right now it's getting better, is that lack of regulation and assurance for institutional clients to be able to deploy that size of capital into the market. But right now we see, obviously, globally, Fidelity rolling out institutional support for crypto, Goldman Sachs doing the same thing, ICE as well, providing more institutional exchanges or the infrastructure for institutions to come in. So I think I'm very positive in the long term. Right now,
again, like when we're talking about the global implications of it, what I'd like to get to is there are certain countries whose currency values have been affected, and the fluctuations have been affecting their economy in general. For example, when we talk about Zimbabwe, or if we want to talk about Venezuela, where the currency value is, and Argentina as well. But I think Argentina has started using cryptocurrency and delving into the market right now. But in terms of Zimbabwe and Venezuela, these two markets, don't you think they would be at an upper hand, at a bigger advantage than the current situation if they heavily invest in cryptocurrencies?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some possibilities that might happen. And we see the usage of crypto assets very different from one jurisdiction to another. And again, kind of back to my definition of what cryptocurrencies or what like blockchain technology is, it's different to different people and it's different to different jurisdictions because it does meet a demand when it comes to potential currencies in highly volatile markets. It does meet a demand of a new asset class in markets where it's attractive to invest in highly volatile assets. So, you see that's kind of different adoption across different markets. I think there's definitely an opportunity in markets where there's highly volatile currencies or like, fiat currencies that it might be, cryptocurrencies might be a replacement to that.
Okay.
However, we don't see, for example, this use case picking up in markets like here in the UAE or in the US, where you've got more stable local currencies, a more stable monetary policy, a better governance, and all of that. So I think there's a different use case for cryptocurrencies in different markets. Now, we're yet to see, obviously, how this cryptocurrency adoption picks up in such markets where there's like weaker financial infrastructure. And it's an interesting, I think, experiment to see how that plays out. In my view, I think the biggest opportunity in 2019 is really institutional adoption. I mean, on our part, we're aiming to be the first exchange to get licensed in Abu Dhabi Global Markets. I know there are like several also other exchanges that are going for this license. So we're aiming to be as the most mature player in the market to acquire those licenses, which would enable us to serve institutional clients regionally.
Right.
So hopefully we'll be able to be the gateway for institutional clients to get exposed to crypto.
Right, Ola, but one thing I really want to ask you after this really, really intense discussion that we've had about the entire medium essentially is what is the utility of cryptocurrencies at this point? What is it that we can actually physically, tangibly buy and sell using it?
I think we're largely right now in the investment phase. And what I mean with the investment phase is that the market largely perceives cryptocurrencies or crypto assets, because not all of them are used as currencies, as a new asset class and a speculative tool for trading, storage, investments, short-term or long-term investment. And it's not just obviously in the UAE. Worldwide, we see this usage and perceiving crypto assets as such. I think there's still a niche market, obviously, that is using cryptocurrencies as an actual utility or or as a currency or a medium of exchange. Some of our user base is using it in that way as well. But I don't still see that usage becoming mainstream. Not yet in the next 12 months either. I think there are still issues around scalability of blockchains that needs to be addressed, which a lot of developers across the community is addressing by rolling out Lightning, rolling out scalability solutions for blockchains, underlying protocols that would allow for such use case. But right now in the UAE, as far as I know, there aren't places for you obviously to use Bitcoin to buy coffee. But the long-term obviously vision in terms of what could be done in blockchains is to allow the people to start using this technology for a better, more affordable, faster way of moving value using blockchain protocols, but not necessarily knowing that you're using blockchain protocols.
Understood. So that's why fiat currency is probably still going to be prevalent for the near future at least.
I think so.
At this point, it's investment. One thing I really want to touch upon is the security element of it, which we just skipped mentioning for a really long time now. But I'm not just talking about cybersecurity. I'm also talking about the whole anonymity aspect of it, because when you're on the web, you have that whole security of anonymity. But can cryptocurrencies also facilitate, although not lead to, but just facilitate things like drug peddling, trafficking, all of these unethical, illegal activities? Do you think it'll be easier using these coins?
So some protocols in the crypto asset space actually provide full anonymity. So they're like kind of the perfect example for that. Now Bitcoin, Ethereum, Ripple, there are like a few other blockchains out there. They don't provide full anonymity. So the transactions are live, the transactions are public. They're pseudonymous in the way that there are a thread of alphanumeric, obviously, symbols that equate to the sender and the buyer. And there are a lot of tools out there that allows monitoring of transactions on the public blockchains to identify, the source, the destination, how those transactions are being used, and all of that. And that's what the regulators are actually using across the world. The regulators here in the UAE are utilizing, and we're using those services as well to monitor such transactions. Having said that, yes, I mean, there are people who are using the internet for such bad or abuses, bad behavior. There are people who will use cryptocurrencies for that. There are people who will use other technologies out there.
It's inevitable, yeah.
It's inevitable. People, always use technology for good cause and bad causes.
Right, but it's good to know that there are certain coins at least that are being regulated, and if this it just goes across the entire cryptocurrency economy, then there is a solution to security as well. Lastly, my last question to you right now would be the outlook for 2019. Where do you see cryptocurrency or the whole idea of cryptocurrency going in this year? not just in the UAE, but globally as well. But let's
Globally.
start with the UAE.
Yeah, well, for the UAE, obviously, I think there's new regulation coming in place. There's a lot of support as well. I think we're seeing more regulators, more banks getting more educated around the crypto asset space. Frameworks out in Abu Dhabi, frameworks out hopefully will be coming in from ESCA as well and other federal regulators. We see obviously regionally as well frameworks, new licensing frameworks out in Bahrain. So I think there's definitely momentum happening in the region. Institutional interest is mobilizing across the region as well. I think we're definitely seeing more maturity in the market.
Yeah.
However, obviously with the prices of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies taking a hit right now, the market is still sort of wary of crypto assets and the volatility around crypto assets. But that leads, I think, to better adoption in the future. I think there are new protocols out there that are quite interesting across stable coins, across Ethereum-like competing protocols that will have a lot of promise on smart contracts. So there's definitely a lot of innovation happening in this space. And even though the market looks like it's going into a bear phase right now, I don't think the work has stopped across the community in rolling out new products, innovating on protocols, and regulators getting more sophisticated.
So you're optimistic in spite of the crash. That's great to know. But Ola, you've actually broken down cryptocurrencies for all of us. And thank you for Bit Oasis as well.
Welcome.
I'm sure you act as a consultancy too, right?
Oh, I try to focus on my business for now, but obviously we work with different corporates and we always liaise with different people on the topic. Yes.
All right, great. But thank you for joining us here and helping
you.
us understand cryptocurrency widely. And thank you for watching AB Live. We will be back again next Tuesday with another topic to discuss with you. Keep tuning in.